I've been thinking of Sisyphus. Some of you will be familiar with the Sisyphus and his being condemned to push a heavy rock up a hill. I think he angered the gods, Greek mythology, and only to get to the top for the rock to fall down again and him to keep pushing the darn rock back up the hill. And I have to say that's rather what it's felt like for me since I came back from what I was describing as a quiet time or renewal time, which I spent away from here for 2 weeks and then another week in the retreat hut. It seemed like I was constantly trying to push the rock up the hill of getting back to, in quotes, normal everyday life here. And it was a bit of a slog because I guess my brain wasn't working so well. So there you have it. I think I'm back to speed more or less now. So, I'm going to start looking at the idea of renewal time or quiet time, and what the intention behind it actually is. And it's not, well, basically I'm not going to be talking about the more leisure time that you might think it is. And so I'll not be talking about how to get fit quickly or find enlightenment very fast or even how to be a nicer person. I'll be talking about the underlying spiritual intention about renewal time and about structuring time, actually. So there's an intention behind time that we are given, as I'm talking about monks now, that it's not to be off on a jolly, really, although ice cream can figure in one's life when you're off for a walk. But I feel like intention or wish lies at the heart, basically, of our waking moments as humans. So the intention is about deciding to do something and then doing it, which is not always that easy. We could call that grasping the will, and often we will talk about grasping the will. But I'd more say that it's about intention, of saying it's about making choices and then following through on them. As I say, time structuring. Because renewal doesn't just happen. You often have to plan ahead. I certainly needed to plan ahead for my time away. And at times I was thinking, oh, is it really worth it? Because it's basically quite a step to remove oneself from the monastery and make all the arrangements of food and COVID security, etc. But however, I'm glad I did. It was what I call a change of pace. And I had some renewing type walks organized for myself. So spiritual renewal is a time set aside from the daily weekly round to be with that which you might be described as one's deepest, most profound aspiration. Sounds grand, doesn't it? What's that? Well, to renew your promise to yourself, perhaps each time you sit down, to engage with this, engage with what is. And that's very hard to draw lines around, and probably best not to draw lines around actually. And that, as I think we can all identify, that aspiration can frequently get lost in the face of the imperative to do, to function, to get things done. And so we can very easily lose sight of what it is that we're about, really. And maybe like me, like you, it's not as easy as it seems to set time aside in your week or in your day. And again, it requires making a deliberate decision and making it enough of a priority to follow through in practice. That's to let drop some plans, hopes and dreams, and to basically exercise the no, sorry, faculty which we have but infrequently invoke, because often our wishes and desires and seeming must-dos can take precedence. So it takes a bit of discipline, self-discipline. Traditionally, religious traditions do it all for you. Think about it. Oh, excuse me, coughing the wrong direction. There is the Sabbath, a day of rest and worship, Sunday for most Christians and Saturday for Jews and a few Christians, and Fridays for Muslims, if following a in the religious tradition. You know, some followers of a religious tradition may not necessarily be able to or follow in that that kind of way. Certainly when, you know, I was a young person, well, past 11 I suppose, and my parents were living in a house owned by a woman who was a Lord's Day Observant Society member, and I was found by her weeding a path in the garden, and she came in and told my mother to tell me to stop doing that because you do not work on the Lord's Day. Believe it or believe it not. So this is, and in Buddhism, in Buddhist countries, there's something I've discovered called the Apostate days. Can you pronounce that, Reverend Digan? Do you know what that is? Apostate. Anyway, apostate. It's practiced in Buddhist countries and talked about as the cleansing of the defiled mind, resulting in inner calm and joy, which doesn't sound too bad, does it? I think it's quite a lot to do with the precepts and observing Buddhist practice. And the closest we get to something like that is our twice monthly recitation of the precepts, or the renewal of the precepts, which we generally do on the first and third Wednesday of the month here at Throsell in the afternoons. So in society generally, time set aside as holy days, if we like to call it that, is well on the map and well on the social calendar, and many of our, if not most of our bank holidays are linked to Christian celebrations, but not all. So those are scheduled for us, as in applied from outside. And what I'm thinking about is the applying ourselves to decide those times for ourselves. So it's an inner discipline rather than one applied from outside. And that's very much more realistic, given our overcommitted lives. Our freedoms to choose how and when we take time to focus on our overtly religious lives is there, but do we choose? Can we choose what to choose to do or not do? It's how one frames out time and what will most serve the purpose that it's there for. It's not really exercising desire so much as what is good. You know, posing that question in yourself, what is it good for me? And I'll put my hand up to choosing some fairly odd activities, you might say, on renewal days. And I'll tell you one of them, or two of them actually. One is to make jam, a marmalade, and jelly, which involves some fairly, what can we say, activities that don't require a lot of thought once we've got the recipe down. Like I spent quite a long time topping and tailing gooseberries earlier in the year, and before that chopping up the skins of the rind of oranges, Savoy orangey marmalade. And there is a deep, I can't quite say satisfaction, but it takes me into myself to do that. And especially as it's not framed as in quotes work time. Yes, it's to do with attitude of mind a lot of the time. Dividing one's time between now I'm working and now I've got free time. Now's my leisure time. But I'm not talking about leisure time so much, although it may have leisure aspects, of course. In our Zen tradition, as when I grew up, you know, at Shasta, our renewal days were fixed on the days which had a 4 and a 9 in the number: 4th, 14th, 24th, 9, 19, 29. And of course, this didn't really mesh in with the world and how we would have retreats, people coming on retreats over weekends. So that we were constantly in problems around the scheduling of our new renewal days on 4 and 9 and managing to run retreats. So around about the early 90s, I think we stopped doing that and started to have Thursday afternoons, at least here at Throstle, Thursday afternoons renewal, and then Mondays, and on festival days, Sunday afternoons as well. And as I said about my own time away, it's a bit of a change of pace. The younger monks would go, well, you know, it's work as usual, Mugō. We're working all day, but it's not quite the same as that. There are stretches of time when can take a contemplative kind of walk. I make a distinction actually in my own mind. Every day I take a walk up and down the road, and I don't tend to look around too much, but just be within myself. I suppose exercising meditation in daily life and refraining from ruminating unhelpfully, spinning one's wheels, in other words. And then on renewal days, I'll often walk further and make it more of a time when I come into a larger space, is the only way I can describe it, by taking in the sights and sounds and smells of the countryside. And I think being out in nature, as I think many people have found these last months, feeds something deep in us. I've never noticed birdsong quite the way that I do at the moment, or as the other day, hearing a stream babbling away, and I stopped and just took it in. The important thing when you take a contemplative walk, incidentally, is to try and edit out the labeling. Oh, there's a nice bird sound, and oh, look at that ugly bit of rubbish. So to discipline your mind to absorb what is there without comment, just as you do in meditation, basically. So what the monks do when they're young monks will be different when they're senior monks. What the need is of the moment. I remember as a young monk, I would spend time much the same as my jam making efforts, but different. I would do stacking wood on renewal days. It wasn't something, in work time it would be work, and in renewal time it was renewing. And again, it was so much to do with attitude of mind, of the just the sheer physicality of it, I think, helped me to let go a little physically, move oneself physically, which releases all sorts of things, body and mind together, in actual fact. And sometimes doing a bit of extra meditation, formal meditation, is on the cards. One of the major things I wanted to say is that relaxing and de-stressing is like number one on social media, the 5 ways to de-stress and the 7 ways to stretch out your tensions. And it's somewhat of a cultural norm, perhaps. And that isn't this, and it's a very marketable, leisure is a very marketable product. Not that many of us, if any of us, can actually buy into some of the things that we'd like to, or you'd like to, perhaps. Theatre, cinema, opera, etc. Even taking off to the mountains, it's not so easy. But whilst the leisure is a product, it only sets up conducive conditions. It's up to the individual then to use those conditions and plan in those conditions. And perhaps the biggest thing of all is to set aside time. And if that's, you know, an hour one day, if you get this chance to just stop, decide, exercise one's agency, which is the ability for one to decide for oneself and make the wise choice in the framework of what I've been talking about. That says something to yourself. It reinforces something to yourself about why you are practicing and have the underlying intention to do your best to follow the precepts, to, I don't know if some of you know the word bodhicitta, the will to enlightenment, to fulfill that promise to yourself. I don't particularly like that way of talking about bodhicitta, but I would say the intention to be present and to be present right here, right now, and to respond in a wise way within the precepts. And all of that can be so less lost sight of in the imperative to do. A lot of renewal is deciding not to do, I found. I do find. I can and did the other day decide not to order some product from the Tesco's to make yet another lot of jam. And I stashed my jam pan under my bed so I couldn't see it. That's my no. That was me exercising my no. I see nods here. Yeah. Saying no to oneself is not, with kindness I have and compassion, is not as easy as you might think. Both internally, you have something that you might wish to say. Pause. No, I don't think I really need to be saying that right now. This is, you know, hedging into the 3 pure precepts, of course, of cease from habitual action, do that which is good, and be good for others. You hear me say that? Be good for others. By doing the first 2, you are good for others. That's my take on that one. So I think I'm just looking at my watch. I do want to give us a chance just for a bit of comment back and forth, because some of you who read my blog, Jade Mountains, will know that I'm attempting to write something on renewal, and so this is a bit of preparation for it, and I'll appreciate anything anybody's got to say from their own experience. Anyway, returning to Sisyphus. Sisyphus was doomed to a life of pushing a heavy rock up a hill, and then having reached the top of the hill, the rock rolls right back down again, constantly. And that might sound something like your life. I hope not, but if you do find yourself feeling like you're pushing a heavy load up a hill, you might just want to take a stop right there and think, is this actually a good thing that I'm doing? Or do I need to change course a little bit? That's an aside thought. So are we too doomed eternally to such meaningless toil as Sisyphus? Constantly, on the one hand, doomed to endless attempting to reach that ever-receding goal out ahead of ourselves and lives in search of an ideal life, or at least a better than this life, or to ultimately doomed to meaningless toil. I'll tell you one thing. when I was a novice, one of the seniors came in to speak to the novices just before the summer period, after the end of the training term, and he said, well, you novices, you're not going to have any renewal time this summer. No camping, no outings, no nothing. He took a breath, he smiled and said, yes, a summer of unremitting toil. I always remember him saying that. But thankfully, some of the seniors took pity, and we did go out on trips out, walking in the hills around Mount Shasta. Albert Camus, who wrote an essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, saw Sisyphus as personifying the absurdity of human life, and that's a big thing for Camus. But he concludes, one must imagine Sisyphus as happy. Really? The struggle itself towards the heights is enough to fill a person's heart. That was his take on that. And I rewrite the end line. Just simply living life itself, best one can, is enough to fill a person's heart. It is enough. It is enough. And still one needs to exercise one's capacity to make choices, especially the choice to say no. And that is precisely the one that we exercise when we sit down and meditate. I'm deliberately deciding to sit down and deliberately deciding not to do anything. Although we don't voice it necessarily, that is actually what it is, that we are engaging with what is right now, right here, not just within one's own body and mind, but within the space that one sits, and that's quite important. Living life itself is enough to fill a person's heart. What that means to you is up to you. But lurking underneath there, given half the chance, there is a joy, as long as one can look at one's attitude of mind and not be Sisyphus, basically.